Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I just have a few technical notes to talk about before we get started on how to participate in this meeting. First, we do have ASL interpreters present, Jim and Heather. They should be visible throughout the entire presentation. If you do need interpretation services, you can hover over their names, click on their 3 dots, and pin them as they start signing. This is to make sure that they're visible to you for the remainder of the meeting. If for some reason they're not visible to you, a recording of this video with an interpreter visible at all times will be made available on YouTube shortly. We will also be taking questions at the end of this presentation. There are a few ways that you can ask questions of the panelists, which is everybody who is visible to you now. You can either raise your hand or use the Q&A feature at the bar along the bottom of your Zoom screen. So to raise your hand, you just click raise hand on the webinar controls. We will be notified that you've raised your hand and we'll call on you to speak. You may be prompted to unmute yourself or we will unmute you, and then you'll be displayed to ask your question. And you can click the raise hand button again in the webinar controls, which is at the bottom of your screen, to lower your hand when your question is answered. You can also ask your question by using the Q&A feature. To do this, you open the Q&A window, which is also found at the bottom bar across your Zoom screen. This will allow you to ask questions to the panelists. We can either reply back to you via text in the Q&A window, or we'll answer your question live. So you'll type your question into the Q&A box, you'll click send. You can also send that question anonymously if you want. We will reply to the Q&A either via text if it's a short one-off question, or we'll answer live out loud, re-say your question and answer for the entire audience. We will attempt to answer all questions that come through either via the raised hands feature or the Q&A function. If any questions are duplicates, we'll try to answer them together, so just be prepared for that. And thanks for coming. I'm going to kick it over to Dave.
Hello, good evening. My name is David Hutchinson. I'm the Assistant Director for Capital and Asset Management with the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget for the City of Pittsburgh. Thanks for joining us for the first of our 3 public meetings for the 2022 capital budget. There's 2 big goals for these meetings. The first is so that you as members of the public, our neighbors, our residents, get a chance to learn about the capital budget, what's inside, how it's created, and also for the city, for us to get input from you on what you want to see included in the 2022 capital budget. If you've been to our meetings on the capital budget in the past, you may have had a great experience talking to neighbors in small groups, debating really important questions. With the move to digital with COVID, we've actually been able to switch things up a little bit and drill down into a little bit more detail in certain sections of the budget. So tonight, we're going to be talking about mobility projects. Tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about recreation projects and our facility projects. So anything parks, playgrounds, pools, sport courts, city facilities, that'll be tomorrow. And then next Tuesday, a week from tonight, we're going to be talking about the more kind of community-based projects around economic development, things that are funded with community development block grants, some projects that the URA does. So that'll be next Tuesday, a week from tonight. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do this in person. I do miss meeting new people and talking to people from different neighborhoods. I also miss the pierogies, so fingers crossed on that. We'll be back eating food and talking capital budget this time next year. As a quick reminder, again, this will be on YouTube. So if you found the conversation to be something informative or something your neighbors might be interested in, feel free to share the link after that's posted. And I want to say thank you so much to the Office of Community Affairs. Leah and Hirsch have done a lot of work on this meeting in the background, a lot of work to promote it. Special thank you to the City Channel, the Department of Innovation and Performance. They've been a huge asset the last 15 months, helping us adjust and still interact with the public in a meaningful way. And thanks again to our interpreters, Heather and Jim, who are with us tonight to make sure everybody can enjoy the meeting. So 2 more notes on that. Yeah, if you just want to mute your audio and turn off your video, that might help. You can also do the pin function that Leah did if you want to make sure you've got Jim and Heather on your screen. Just want to do a quick accessibility check to see if anybody's having problems connecting. Okay, So for tonight's agenda, Brendan, are you able to share your screen with the slide deck? And then one more slide. So tonight's agenda, we're going to be covering kind of four things. We're going to do a short overview of the capital budget. Brendan's going to take you through some of the mechanics of how we create the capital budget, what a capital improvement plan is. We're going to pass it to the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We're joined by Director Ricks to get some expertise on what they do, give you some background on how those dollars are spent. We're going to finish with a question and answer session that Leo was referencing earlier. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions of a pretty great panel, get some questions answered that way. And then we'll wrap up with some other opportunities for you to provide input on the 2022 capital budget process. In terms of outcomes for this meeting, there's kind of two outputs that you're going to help us create. One is survey results. So at the end of this meeting or during this meeting or after this meeting, we're going to invite you to take a survey. Feel free to pass that along to your neighbors, post it to your neighborhood Facebook groups. We want as much input as possible, so please help us share the survey. What we end up doing with the survey results is we publish them in the capital budget. We also share them with departments. We try to get all the survey results turned around pretty quickly to the departments and the council offices, so they have an opportunity to look at your survey responses and write a proposal for the 2022 capital budget based on your input. Also later on, when you'll be asking questions of the expert panel, those are going to be recorded as part of the YouTube as well. So that's a great opportunity to have a public conversation about something that's important to you. And we do our best to, all the questions you pose will be recorded as well, so we can share anything written in this session with the departments and council offices as well. At this time, I'm going to pass it to Brendan, who's with the Office of Management and Budget as well, to talk through some details on the capital budget itself.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Brendan Katikia. I'm a senior analyst in the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. Let's get back to our presentation. So I'm going to describe a little bit the annual budgeting process that we follow in the city of Pittsburgh and how tonight's public meeting plugs into that process. So the two main governing documents that are produced by the city of Pittsburgh annually are both our operating budget and our capital budget. As you might have guessed, we're focused on this document here on the right, the capital budget. There are important differences between both of these documents. The operating budget covers everything that is required to manage the city's daily operations. So that pays for all staff salaries and benefits. It covers office supplies. So this is where pens and paper are paid from. It includes some coverage of city assets, but it's more annual maintenance and upkeep rather than significant investments that would be covered by the capital budget. The capital budget is paying for everything that you, the public, will interact with daily, that is city owned or city maintained. So that's all of our streets, that's our bridges, our parks, playgrounds. That also covers city owned assets or maintained assets with a roof. So that might be our public works facilities that are throughout the city. Essentially, it's city or significant improvements to city-owned or maintained assets. So you might think about the difference between these two documents as being, the operating budget might be the oil change for a car, and the capital budget on the right might be replacing your transmission. That's kind of what distinguishes both of these. So this slide here is pulled directly from our 2021 capital budget, and this is what's called the capital improvement plan. So we pay for or fund many capital projects within any given year. And these dollar amounts here are the sum total of what is budgeted for all of those projects. Capital projects cost millions of dollars. They often take years to complete, starting with the very initial planning process, going through construction, and then project closeout. So when the city adopts a budget, we're actually only adopting the budget for the following year. So right now we're talking about what would be included in the 2022 capital budget. When City Council at the end of the year adopts the budget, it's only really for 2022. Now, keeping in mind that these are large projects that will take years, we do want to and need to really responsibly project out what it's going to cost to perform those improvements. So that's, you can kind of see here, following along with each row, what our anticipated funding is to pay for all of these projects for the 5 years after that budget that we're covering. And each of these columns here are the funding sources that we use to pay for capital projects in the city of Pittsburgh. So I won't get too in the weeds on these, but moving from left to right, CDBG is the Community Development Block Grant, which I think David mentioned a little bit earlier. This is an annual grant that we receive from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. Bond is money that we borrow and pay back. We use it to finance large investments that we think are going to be very long lasting. So that might be like a major bridge improvement, might be something that we pay for with bond dollars. We're comfortable taking out the debt and financing it over a long time. To go back to kind of the car analogy that I used earlier, that's comparable to maybe taking out a car loan or mortgage financing for the purchase of a home. PAYGO is money that is transferred over from the operating budget in the form of an operating surplus. This is our own money that we're collecting annually, and we make it available for use on city capital projects. And then other is literally anything else that does not fit into these other buckets. That's primarily in the form of grants that we might receive from the state government, or support that we receive for federally subsidized large transportation and infrastructure projects, some of which I think we'll be talking about later on this evening. So this slide here covers the timeline each year that we go through in drafting and preparing and finally submitting and adopting the capital budget. So we start in May and we carry all the way through December. So 3/4 of any given year is spent preparing the next year's capital budget. So we start the year in April when the mayor proposes to city departments what the priorities will be for the following year's budget. So these are overarching themes. They're not necessarily a specific project that the mayor wishes to see in the budget, but they're meant to guide what sort of proposals we receive. And there's a slide in a bit here where you'll actually see what those priorities are. In May, the Office of Management and Budget issues a request for proposals to all city departments who work on capital projects, city authorities who are also engaged in administering capital projects, and then also external partner organizations who we have worked with in the past, again, on implementing capital projects. This bolded line here is where we are tonight. In June every year, we hold public hearings to get feedback from you about what should be in the capital budget that is a priority for city residents, that again, we can distribute to directors, administration, city council, to possibly see as something that is included in the next year's budget. The deadline for all of those proposals is July 1st of each year. And then throughout the summer, the Capital Program Facilitation Committee, which is this acronym here, CPFC, meets with those city departments and authorities about every proposal that is submitted for the next year's budget. And that committee is made up of representatives of the administration, city council, and the city controller's office. So there are maybe 24 meetings that occur throughout the summer to review all of the proposals that came in any given year. So what happens then is that committee evaluates every proposal, they score them, those scores are summarized, and then those are presented to the mayor's office. And then that becomes kind of the foundation that is put into the next row here, which is the September budget, which is proposed by the mayor by September 30th of each year. This was actually a practice that was started with State Act 11 in 2004. And we have put it into city code now that there will be this initial budget that is presented in September of each year. So that budget document is then refined for the next 6-ish weeks. And then in November, the mayor formally proposes the next year's capital budget to city council at a state of the city address that occurs. So at that point, the budget is essentially handed off to city council who have a series of hearings that are open to the public to provide comment on. They meet with all of the city departments, and council ultimately, puts together what the capital budget will be for the next year. So as I mentioned earlier, we start every year with what the mayor's priorities are for the next year's budget. I won't go through each of these individually. And again, these are meant to be overarching themes, as you can see, rather than something the specific proposal. They're meant to inspire proposal ideas from departmental leadership. They're meant to engage departments with assessing how does this proposal that is being prepared necessarily fit into the mayor's budget and priorities. These are also listed in no particular order beyond just kind of Tetrising how they can all fit onto the slide here. So this slide here is actually the project proposal form that is distributed to city departments, authorities, and partner organizations annually. As you can see, we're not just interested in what the dollar amount is. We want to know what the project is. We also want a justification for why we would do the project or what the impact would be of not doing the project. And then we also want to know what the operational impact would be if we were to implement a capital project. If we were to take on and acquire a new asset, what is it going to cost to pay for that asset? That might be something that we don't necessarily see reflected in future capital budgets, but it might be something that is captured by the operating budget each year thereafter. And then this slide here is what that committee I referenced earlier, the Capital Program Facilitation Committee. This is the scoring criteria that is used to evaluate all of the capital project proposals. So we're looking all the way from if a project proposal addresses a threat to public safety or health, through does it comply with a planning document that the city has issued and adopted. When these are all scored by the Capital Program Facilitation Committee, these are all weighted differently. So something that is going to address a safety concern is going to be weighted more heavily than the cost of actually performing the intervention. And this list, these criteria are all adopted in city code. So these are very official how we use or what are used to assess proposals each year. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure to cover the sorts of projects that are funded or that they perform that are funded through the capital budget each year.
All right, thank you, Brendan. Let me switch over to my screen. See if we can get this to work. So I'm Karina Ricks. I am the director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And we do make up a significant share of the capital budget. I think last year, maybe it was around 54% of the capital budget became projects that were overseen by DOMI, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. The department is comprised of 3 bureaus. The Bureau of Policy, Planning, and Permitting, who oversees our policy and planning, but also all of the right-of-way management, utility coordination, street lighting, bus shelters, lots of uses that fall into the public right-of-way. The Bureau of Project Design and Delivery, which is the civil and structural engineering unit of the department. So landslides and bridges and streets, intersection reconfiguration, concrete, brick, blockstone, and street resurfacing all fall under that bureau. And then finally the Bureau of Traffic Operations, which oversees the operations of our overall system. So how we allocate the right-of-way between different street uses like parking, bicycle lanes, travel lanes, turn lanes, how the signals operate, how much time is allotted to each approach. Traffic calming, which is a very popular program, is under that group. The maintenance of our markings and signals all fall there as well. And I'm pleased to be joined by our municipal traffic engineer, Nick Ross, who now oversees the Bureau of Traffic Operations. So the mission of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is to provide the physical mobility necessary to support the social and economic mobility of the people of Pittsburgh. And we do that through the management, improvement, and operation of the public rights of way. So research has shown us that transportation mobility is the single largest factor in economic mobility, and we really take that mission to heart. We're organized around 5 goals that really drive our work and that we try and center our findings around. So first is that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on city streets. So Vision Zero, we're very committed to. We sometimes measure this by really thinking about, as we look at our streets and intersections, are these streets safe and intuitive and easy to use by, say, a 12-year-old child? Because if that child can safely get across the street, chances are the rest of our community can also travel safely if they're safe and intuitive for that, user. Secondly, that every resident can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home, and that they can do this without the requirement of a private automobile. So sometimes I call this the ice cream test. Can people buy ice cream and get it home before it melts, inclusive of waiting for the bus, waiting for a bike share, walking home, all the different ways. And we work that both in partnership with the Department of City Planning and URA and other entities, as well as trying to facilitate the easy flow of our mobility system. Thirdly, that all trips less than 1 mile are easy and enjoyable to accomplish by non-vehicle travel. So we know that about 25% of the motor vehicle trips in the city of Pittsburgh are less than 1 mile in distance. That's way too many. So if we can achieve this goal, we can reduce traffic congestion and associated emissions significantly just by making it more pleasant to travel on those very short distance trips by more sustainable means. Fourthly, that no household needs to spend more than 45% of their income on housing, transportation, and energy costs. Right now, housing and transportation make up the 2 largest portions of a household income. The lower that you go on our income scale, the greater the portion that's spent on transportation. And transportation can actually be a higher proportion for the lowest quintile group than housing is. And energy costs, as we all know, particularly in winter, is a significant expense for our households. So if we can satisfy basic mobility needs, adequate housing needs, expending less than 45% of the income, that means that our households can afford those fresh fruits and vegetables, higher education, and other clothing, other necessities of life. And finally, that our streets reflect the value and pride of our city. So we pride ourselves on being the city of Mr. Rogers. We pride ourselves on being a city of neighborhoods, but sometimes our streets seem definitively less neighborly than we might like them to be. And so really looking at that and thinking about how can we create streets that really tell the story of how our community sees themselves, so that the general public in the world can see us as we see ourselves through our streets. We're responsible for a significant number of assets and improvements. So over 1,000 miles of local streets. There's about 1,200 miles of streets in the city overall. The vast majority of them are under local responsibility and local control. The balance are state routes and county streets. We're responsible for over 600 signalized intersections. and a host more of other electronic devices like school flashing signs, variable message signs, other kinds of devices that need to be installed and maintained by our crews. Over 60,000 street lights are under our responsibility to maintain and keep operational. 120 bridges are locally maintained. So we have about 400 bridges overall. Many of them are railroad bridges. A number of them are, again, state and county bridges, but 120 are locally maintained by the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We have about 20% of our bridges that are categorized as in poor condition right now. So definitely an area of needed investment. We have 70 miles of trails and bicycle lanes. That has increased. We added 13 more lanes just in the past year alone. We anticipate adding at least that many this year as we continue to try and provide safe facilities for people who choose to travel by that mode of transportation. We have over 800 sets of public steps. We have hundreds of thousands of street signs that need to be maintained on a really frequent basis as they get knocked down or faded or removed. We have tens of thousands of pavement markings, including thousands and thousands of miles of long lines, many of which need to be restored every year. So our crews are very busy every year going around and remarking those. 60,000 rights-of-way permits were issued last year. That includes for private development as well as for utility uses and other activities in the public rights-of-way. It's a tremendous amount of coordination that needs to happen, and we're grateful that we now have an electronic permitting system, so a lot of that can be done online. We're also responsible for scores of landslides and flood mitigation projects each year, traffic calming and mobility planning, and a host of other activities. So going through our major program areas, we have a great number of needs with all of those assets that we're responsible for. More needs than there's frankly budget or staff capacity to deliver on. And so we do need to prioritize those projects as possible. And so we've developed a prioritization process within the department before those projects even get into that capital budget review team that Brendan mentioned. So there's already a vetting that happens before they arrive there. So first and foremost, bridges and retaining walls, these are our structural assets. These are some of our most expensive activities that we undertake. So how do we prioritize these? We prioritize these first by critical safety upgrades. So is there something, as you may have seen, we have occasions where our bridges are dropping material onto streets or properties below, where we have to restrict a lane because it's no longer safe for live loads to travel on it, where there may be openings in the sidewalk on the bridge that then you can see below. So if it's a critical safety need, obviously that rises it right up to the top. We then look at asset condition and what is the regular maintenance schedule that this should be on to maintain that asset. Most of our bridges are inspected every year. Some of our bridges need to be, every 2 years. Some of our bridges need to be inspected every 6 months. Those that have been classified as being in poor condition are inspected much more frequently because their condition can deteriorate rapidly. Because we have more facilities in poor condition than we can really invest in, we also need to look at what is the return on investment. So can we don't want to defer a relatively low cost investment today and allow that bridge to deteriorate to a place where we need to do a full bridge replacement in the not too distant future. We would rather do that timely maintenance on it so that we can extend the life of the assets, save ourselves resources in the long term, even though that bridge may not be the most deficient in condition right now. We also look at use. Unfortunately, we are perhaps, if there's not an infrastructure bill and other investments happening at the national level, we may be at a place where we need to think about triaging those bridge assets that we have. And so we have a number of very short span bridges that are less than 20 feet in length, that may service only one or two properties. And so we do need to do a little bit of a cost benefit analysis on some of those, as to if it's worth that investment to maintain that short span bridge and service a very, very low frequency use, or if there's other alternatives that we need to look at. And then again, if there's available alternative routes. So for example, the Duck Hollow bridge that we just completed this past year, while it only services a small number, relatively small number of households across 9 Mile Run, it is the only way in and out of that community. And so for emergency services and others, it was critically important that we addressed that bridge. We then have a large program. These are roughly alphabetical in terms of the programs in the budget book, if you care to follow along in your capital budget document. Complete Streets is a large program area that encompasses a number of different activities that the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure does. So there's several slides that I'll go through what we do under that category of Complete Streets. The first of which is planning and mobility, so network analysis. And so this is something that we really don't do enough of. Planning always results in better project selection, better asset management, better decision-making, and a more engaged public. And so we do really advocate for more investment in area studies, network studies, things where we can look at actually the network effect of the investments that we make, but how we prioritize those areas that we can complete planning on is based on a number of transportation-related indicators like 311 requests, crash statistics, traffic volume, transit accessibility, on-street parking management or on-street curbside management, and then local land use characteristics. So are we seeing an area that is undergoing pretty significant land use changes that require that we get ahead of what's happening on the transportation network. So for example, the Strip District, of course, has undergone rapid change in recent times. Uptown has seen more institutional development and impacts there. East Liberty. These are places where network planning and advanced planning is necessary to service those communities and also manage the network within them. So we also then look at different kinds of social economic characteristics, schools, libraries, religious institutions. How do we need to service connectivity to these critical destinations that people are needing to get to? So we understand that it's not transportation just for transportation's sake. It's transportation to get to important places and to satisfy the needs of daily life. And so looking at those destinations, where are they and how can we better connect our communities? Traffic calming is a relatively new program. We've only been doing traffic calming. This will be our third year that we are working on traffic calming projects. It is a program that has been the victim of its own success. We've gotten exponential increases in the number of requests that we get for traffic calming on our streets, to the point where, today we're really looking at only being able to satisfy about 1/10 of the requests that we get to actually make these traffic calming improvements on those streets. In general, traffic calming is best accomplished when motorists slow down and follow the rules of the road, rather than having to do major capital investments on those streets that do cost on average somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 per project that we do. But nonetheless, we do have a long list of traffic calming requests that come in, and then we look to prioritize those. So it starts with stakeholder input, sort of making us aware of the project need. We then do some initial data screens on the volume of traffic and the vehicle speed data. Again, we look at sort of the cost benefit analysis, how many people would be served by this improvement. Is it a higher density area? Are there more vulnerable street users there that we would want to protect? Is it proximity to schools, parks, senior centers, places of worship, places that would generate that kind of pedestrian traffic? And again, we know that there is a correlation between motor vehicle speeds and severity of crashes and fatalities and injuries. So the more that we have vulnerable street users, that would tick up higher on our analysis. Also looking at equity indicators. So neighborhoods that have lower household incomes tend also to have lower vehicle ownership rates and higher dependency on bicycling, walking, and use of public transit, which means, again, that we have much higher density of those vulnerable street users. And those are the places then that we need to prioritize for traffic calming. On traffic safety, which is very much related to traffic calming, but often is used in reference to segments and intersections of higher order streets. So streets that are generally carry a higher volume of motor vehicle traffic or transit, or just play a higher order role in our street network. Again, many locations that require traffic safety interventions. There we would look at factors like sidewalk width. Is it in a business district or a very well-used street, again, where there might be major generators that would require that safety intervention? Does it overlay with other planned projects? So can we leverage other investments to accomplish these safety improvements and stretch that dollar further? Do we have bicycle or transit corridors that are in alignment with that intersection or that segment? Stakeholder concern, public input that is there. Is it feasible? So some of our streets, there's really very few interventions that we can offer just given the context of the street. So obviously we want to prioritize those that we actually can make a meaningful impact on. Does it correlate with other planning efforts that have gone on? So has there been a city planning or a DOMI plan done in that area that has identified this as being a critical safety juncture that needs to be implemented? And somewhat regrettably, we also need to look at parking impacts, because we do hear from stakeholders that some of our residents are reticent to trade parking loss for enhanced safety. And that's really a culture change that we're hoping to facilitate, because we certainly believe that human life is the most precious thing to work toward. The complete streets category also includes signal upgrades and signal installation. So again, we have over 600 signalized intersections. Some of them are vintage. Some of them have not been upgraded for almost a generation. And because of those limitations, we're not able to do some of the more modern things that we would like to do, like have pedestrian indicator lights on them, to have things like leading pedestrian intervals, which aid in safety for pedestrians crossing streets. They're not necessarily networked back into a central hub. So really looking to upgrade and bring current our signal assets around the city. Again, when we look at that, and we're usually able to do somewhere between 5 and 7 signal upgrades a year using local resources, an increment more when we use state, federal, or grant resources. So when we look to prioritize our signals, we look at the condition of the asset. Is it, are the poles structurally sound? Is the controller, adequate? What needs to happen there? We look at safety concerns. Is this an area where we do need that greater functionality in order to address safety at the intersection? What is the sort of importance of this signal in our overall network? So does this serve a number of travelers by all modes, automobile, pedestrian, bicycle? Because we really want to service those highest volume locations to the best of our abilities versus when we have to trade off, then looking at those lower volume locations where the risk is perhaps a little bit less just by virtue of the volume. We look at corridor operations. So if we have a number of different signals in sequence that have all been upgraded, but there's one in the middle that's just not able to do what we need it to do, that really throws off the overall corridor. So we want to prioritize those then. Geographic distribution, so really looking for geographic equity as well as economic equity in where we make these investments. Community support, has this been highlighted by the council member or the public as being a need? And again, concurrent investments, where can we really leverage other investments to try and again stretch that dollar further? The complete streets category also includes our Bike Plus improvements. And so we do call it Bike Plus because we know that other users, as we've seen during the pandemic, these sort of slow lanes are important for all kinds of users, not just people on conventional bicycles. So looking to really enhance that as being an attractive mode of travel, an efficient mode of travel, but more than anything else, a safe mode of travel for people who choose that. So again, our Bike Plus plan calls for the addition of, I think, 60 more miles of bike facilities over and above what we have right now. We're not able to do that all at once. So again, we need to prioritize. The way we prioritize those is looking at what are those mobility connections? Where does that enable people getting to and from those critical destinations, the density of housing? We look at, does this complete or connect assets that we've already invested in? Everybody has seen the bike facilities that start and stop along corridors. We really want to connect that as a whole network. So prioritizing those connections. Safety concerns, is this a place where we see, a higher frequency of bicycle related crashes, where we see higher vulnerabilities for people on bicycles? Looking at geographic distribution again, so that we can allow people across our city to use this very sustainable, very pleasant mode of transportation, no matter where they live in our city. Community support is always plays into this, and again, concurrent investments. So where else can we facilitate as we get new development? And we don't want to see a commensurate rise in motor vehicle traffic and congestion and all of those associated negatives with new development. We need to sync sustainable mobility options together with new investments that are coming online. Related to complete streets, but actually in its own category, are trails. So trails are a very important and sort of a signature asset of the city of Pittsburgh. We have quite a bit more riverfront trail as well as within the city trail network that we would like to build out. Again, we need to prioritize among those desires. And so we try and take those trails that are perhaps easier and still serve a high degree of need. So we look at right-of-way. Is this something where we already have the property or can get the property from railroads? Is it in a floodplain? Is there an easement, for example, along the rivers where we actually have site control and are able to construct this new asset? Topography, can we build it without needing significant retaining walls or cutting into the toe of a slope or doing anything else like that? So looking at those places that are a little bit easier to do connectivity, does it link naturally to other pieces of the network that we have? Does it take people where they want to go? Expected ridership on this trail, is it something that actually has a good user base? Again, the stakeholders, technical complexity, is sort of encompassed within those other bullets above. And then, is this something that was contemplated in either our Bike Plus plan or our pedestrian safety action plan for investments that are recommended for those modes of travel. So have continued year over year to build out our trail network. It's really served the city exceptionally well and is one of the most pleasant aspects of the city, I guess, in my opinion. Flood control is another program that somewhat a little bit unusual in the scope of projects that DOMI does, because this doesn't necessarily relate to public rights of way. In fact, many of our runs and waterways are actually privately owned. The property lines extend into the base of the river, but nonetheless, the impacts of flooding affect transportation ways as well as private property and public property. And so DOMI, because we have the engineers, generally takes responsibility for those flood control projects. This can include, within this category is not only those daylighted waterways, streams and runs that we have, but we also do a number of projects in partnership with PWSA under this category. So where we have persistent flooding due to springs or other kinds of water flows that create icy conditions or just very problematic to handle on the land, those also come out of this flood control line. So again, public input is important to that. Jurisdiction, do we actually have the rights and the ability to make an impact on this? What is the impact? How, in other words, how bad is the problem that we're trying to address? Again, feasibility comes into play. Some of them, they're just really difficult nuts to crack, and so you know, those sometimes do get deferred a little bit further away. Is it cost effective? Again, how many properties, how many travelers do these investments really benefit? So trying to really serve the greatest number with every dollar that we spend. And then are there cost sharing opportunities? Can we partner with PWSA or the railroads or a land developer to try and get these projects accomplished and again, stretch that public dollar. Steps, some of our favorite things in the city, but many of them have fallen into disrepair. This picture is of the Vista Street steps, which I'm happy to say are one of the major investments that we've been able to do over the past year, and they're nearly complete. So we have been able to change that steps closed sign to steps wide open and reconnected, which is great. So for our steps investment, we were able to do a really innovative prioritization project a few years ago called the City Accelerator Project, which David was a part of. And that resulted in a really well thought out prioritization methodology that looked at all of these things: condition to major destinations, length of alternate routes, equity. Does it service those big pedestrian generators like transit connections or schools? And so we use that, which you can see it, City Steps Plan. If you go to the DOMI website, you can link to it, or you can just Google Pittsburgh City Steps prioritization, and it'll take you there. We also then layer on top of that prioritization matrix, which is across all steps. Then we layer onto it an asset condition. So that map doesn't necessarily tell you what is the condition of the steps, but as we identify steps that are in need of repair, then we prioritize them using that methodology. And then we, as always, need to factor in the rough cost benefit analysis. So how many people are served by this investment that is taking place? Again, we have a huge backlog of need on the city steps side of the equation, and not nearly enough resources. Although we're hopeful again that this infrastructure bill will result in some investments to city steps. Street resurfacing is our largest single program. So year over year, we generally invest somewhere between $16 and $19 million into this program alone. So there's a huge amount of work that goes into this. With that amount of resource investment, we're usually able to pave between 40 and 60 miles of city street each year. Again, we know that the need outstrips the resources and the ability to deliver. So again, we have to prioritize. We do that based on the overall condition index. That's what that OCI is. That's a database that we maintain that estimates the depreciation of our streets over time, and so projects condition out over time. We look at equitable geographic distribution, not equal geographic distribution. So for example, whether you believe it or not, the streets in District 8, taken as a whole, proportionally are in better condition than the streets in District 9. So we try and allocate those resources based on the proportion of streets in poor condition across the 9 council districts of the city. So District 9 gets about 4 times the amount of investment than District 8 gets, because they contain about 4 times as many streets in poor condition than District 8 receives. So we strive to do that based on equity. We also look at safety concerns. So when those streets do fall into such a state of disrepair that it presents a safety issue, we must address those. We really work in good partnership with our friends at DPW, who, between the environmental services crews and the street maintenance crews, really drive these city streets every single day. So they see what is happening out there, and they're able to give us very intimate knowledge on the need that exists there. And then again, we try and leverage other projects. So where utilities are doing work and they'll end up paving half the street, we'll partner with them to pave the other half. We have a traffic calming program that we're doing. While potholes themselves might calm traffic, that's usually not the public's preferred method. So if we're putting speed humps in, we'll try and partner with the street resurfacing program so that we can restore the street in between those humps into a good condition. The street resurfacing program also includes our concrete, brick, and blockstone investments. And so again, those are done while we don't have the OCI, we don't have a condition inventory there, but we also draw resources out of this pool to do that. And that is usually where we can make more surgical investments, so we can address a small sunken area of a brick street, but by addressing that, the rest of the street is really in great condition. A lot of that is selected based on 311 requests from the public. Landslides, again, not a traditional area of responsibility for a DOT. It is for us because we've seen a huge increase in the amount of land movement since 2018. It is related to global climate change. We do expect that we'll continue to see more issues crop up here. It's also related to necessary investment in PWSA's water and sewer infrastructure. So we have to tackle it on both sides. We again have more landslide activity than we have resources to address. Each landslide that requires a retaining wall generally runs us about $1 million per project. So prior to 2018, we averaged about $600,000, $700,000 a year in landslide investment. In recent years, that number has really come up to more on the order of $5 to $6 million a year that we're investing in landslide mitigation. And so again, how do we prioritize those needs? We prioritize them based on imminent danger. Is it a hazard to a public right of way? Is there an impact on structures that are at risk? What is the complexity of really addressing this? Can we construct something in a meaningful way? What is happening on the road? Is this a higher priority road that has significant traffic volumes on it, like Commercial Street that we had to restore over the last Forward Avenue, Commercial Street, we had to restore over the last year because it's such a critical connector versus some of the, again, streets that service only one or two private properties. It's not that we love those private properties any less, but in spending the public dollar, really looking at where we can get the greatest benefit to the general public for those investments that are made. Are there alternate routes so that, you know, perhaps this segment of street is not vitally necessary? So looking at all of that and prioritizing it. And then finally, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, in addition to the very significant investments that are made through our own local bond resources and some of our PAYGO money, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure also is able to leverage outside funding, principally from federal and state funding sources. And so there's a number of federal programs that we look to tap. These might be things like the Highway Safety Improvement Program or the HSIP program, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, or the CMAQ program, the Surface Transportation Program, which looks at general streets. So those programs also have their own performance measures and prioritization criteria, which include highway safety, whether it's a national highway system asset or not. That doesn't necessarily mean, is it an interstate? So many of our local streets actually fall onto the national highway system categorization because they're critical connectors in our city and in the region. Is there transit that serves these streets? Is there asset management that is necessary? SPC has the regional plan, so the Connects program, and so does this fit into that regional plan as we pursue those fundings? And again, these are the different programs that we try and tap at the federal level. We do compete on a regional level for these discretionary programs. There is talk in the new infrastructure bill of perhaps direct aid, or at least a mandatory formula funding to urbanized centers, which would assist in on a per capita basis, getting more state and federal resources coming to the denser urban center, rather than sort of spreading it out across our 10-county region in the same way that we do it now. So, but federal resources are critically important to us. This is where we can have 80 or 95% of a project funded by non-local sources. So it's really important in what we do. And I think, Brendan, that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Director Ricks. It's a lot of different balls to juggle, but I think the department does things extremely well, especially the last couple of years. I've seen such huge growth with the traffic calming program and how popular it is, for good reason. I think everybody gets concerned sometimes when you see cars driving a little bit dangerously on your street, and it's nice to know that there's resources available to help change that. Brendan, do you mind to share our slide deck again? We've got 3 more slides from us, and then we're going to go to question and answer, so this will be quick. We wanted to give you a sense of what filling out this survey would look like. And for 2022, we've actually moved the survey to Engage PGH, which is a great platform city planning has started maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, for all kinds of different engagements between city and residents. So you can actually find out about some of the larger scale DOMI projects on Engage PGH as well. There's an Engage PGH page specifically for the 2022 capital budget where you can go and click on this survey. So the opportunity here is you can tell us specific projects that you want to see with an exact location of where you want the work. You can also just let us know kind of overall what your budget priorities are. So if you want to see more money for street resurfacing or more money for playgrounds, but maybe you don't have a specific playground in mind, you can still indicate that on the form. And then also we try to get your feedback on the mayor's priorities each year. It's just a nice feedback loop back to the administration so they understand how well their desires are kind of matching up with residents overall. The survey responses themselves, like I said earlier, we review them in our office. We try to code them in a way that's useful for departments and project managers. So as you can see, the yellow section is kind of our value add, what we add to the process. If there's multiple projects, sometimes like in this case, it could be a complete street project. It could be a trail development project. We tag them both so that the different project managers for both of those still get to see this. And then we also tag any geographies. So in this case, District 6 and District 7 were mentioned. So we want those council offices to know that this feedback was provided so they have the opportunity to put in a capital budget proposal. This is a great example actually because we have a really nice big multi-year, multi-fund source, robust projects happening with Allegheny River, excuse me, Allegheny River Green Boulevard. And it's been great to see the departments dig into and ask questions and send follow-up comments to us about the feedback that we've gotten from residents that we've sent to them, and then also to see them turn into real budgeted projects. In terms of how the projects are kind of organized, we try to put them in 6 different buckets within the capital budget. You can see those 6 buckets represented here. And then each year we try to do a comparison of what were the projects that people asked for in the survey, and then what are the types of projects that ended up in the capital budget. Usually we're pretty close. I think this was a pretty solid year in 2021. There's 2 areas that people often forget about. I understand they're not the most exciting thing in the world. Vehicles and the administration and subaward categories. Those aren't front of mind for a lot of residents. That's understandable, but I think in general, we line up pretty well. You can see a lot of our projects are DPW projects, Department of Public Works projects or Department of Mobility and Infrastructure projects, that big light green section. There's a lot of engineering and construction, a lot of stuff that's kind of out there in the built environment. And then we wanted to wrap up with just some additional resources for you. This is not your last chance to engage at all. Of course, you can always text 311 if you see, or tweet at 311 if you ever see anything out in the streets that don't really look right to you. They're a great resource. They have excellent staff. They're really excellent at organizing these requests and sending them down to the departments to get addressed. They also have live operators from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. If you ever just want to call the number 311, you can leave a voicemail. Also, your council budget office is represented on this call. Thanks, Bill, for joining. I think Mike joined as well. You can reach out to the council budget office. You can reach out to your council office directly through the city's website. It has each of the contacts for each of the 9 different council districts. There's a map on there to figure out which council district might be yours. And then it's a really great opportunity to email the council office directly. Things really become a strong proposal whenever we're seeing those kind of different engagement points. Whenever we're seeing comments from the capital budget survey, also we're seeing them in 311. Also, we might be seeing them through council feedback that they're getting whenever you pick up the phone and call your council office or you send them an email. They're seeing kind of the same trends that we are, and it becomes a consensus. So that's a great way to go. Additionally, we have, as has been referenced a few times, the 2022 capital budget survey. You can find that on our Engage PGH website. And then finally, there's a nice couple tools on Balancing Act. If you Google Balancing Act Pittsburgh, there's a tax receipt, which allows you, a tax receipt simulator, which allows you to put in your income. If you own any property, you can put in the value of that property. And it gives you a model of kind of an itemized receipt of where all your specific tax dollars might be going proportionally. So if you wanted to know how much of my money is going towards public safety versus mobility projects, you can put in your salary and get a sense of how those things are kind of split up between the 2 budgets overall, and then also within the capital budget itself. And then additionally, we have our capital budget simulator, which is a fun tool. It allows you to kind of do our job. You get to go in with the existing budget and move things around. You can take money from one project, add it to another, but also like our job, at the end of the day, it all has to balance. So it won't let you submit the budget until you balance it, but you can also submit it with comments. And then we review the information you submit, all the pluses and minuses that you've done, all the comments you've provided to specific portions of money or specific projects. We share those with the council offices and the departments as well. So those are a great resource. So now we've reached the question and answer session. Of course, we've got our Office of Management Budget. We also have DOMI, Council Budget Office is here as well, as I referenced. There's 2 ways you can ask a question. You can use the raise hand function, or you can also use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Both of those, I believe for me, they're at the bottom of the screen. They're separate buttons. We already have one question from Barbara, so I'm going to read that now. The team from Move Forward PGH spoke with us, and actually, I'm sorry, the first question got moved. Okay. Barbara Warwick here from the Greenfield Community Association. There's a heavily used section of road in my neighborhood, Greenfield Ave, between Haldane and 2nd Ave, where DOMI has recorded roughly 25 accidents since 2015. It's also an extremely dangerous section of road for pedestrians and bicyclists. It runs by a key entry point for kids walking to Greenfield Elementary School. We would like to see traffic calming measures, even simple ones, put in place here to slow down drivers speeding up and especially down the hill. How can we ensure this project is included in the upcoming budget? If you notice, Dr. Ricks already answered from the DOMI side. If there's anything additional you want to add, feel free. I'll say from the capital side, for the end of your project, end of your question, how can we ensure this project is included in the upcoming budget? You're already kind of doing it. You're coming to this meeting, you're providing a comment, a question that we're going to record. Obviously, Director Ricks has heard it, so they understand it's a priority. But then don't feel scared to reach out to your council office as well. You can email them, let them know it's a priority. Also, as Brendan referenced, council in the month of December has public hearings on all of the different portions of the budget. So you have the opportunity to comment then in support of a project. That's something that I think people miss out on. I think people are much stronger at, and understandably so, much stronger coming out for something that they may be afraid of or that they're against. But I wish we saw more people speaking out in favor of the things that they value and they prioritize in their neighborhoods. So don't feel like this is your last chance. Keep the communication going. Director Ricks, you gave a great written answer. I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted.
I can add a little bit more. So there's because Barb's follow-up was she understood that the project was taken off the list. Not entirely the right categorization. So in 2020 and 2021, we were fortunate to partner with a group called People for Bikes, who helped us do sort of what we would call quick build bicycle projects. So these are projects that we could do relatively swiftly. They maybe didn't have a lot of traffic impacts associated with them, didn't have complex construction associated with them. They were things that we could do really in rapid form. We were hopeful that Greenfield Avenue would be one of those. And so Greenfield was initially one of those that we had prioritized to try and get done. We agree with you. It is a really critical corridor for complete street connections. When we really got into it with the community, did sort of that asset condition inventory, it is going to require a higher level of investment and a higher level of engineering to make that work. It is not that Greenfield Avenue is that we've given up on Greenfield Avenue. That is patently not the case. But it's that we're going to have to be a little bit slower and more deliberate in figuring out what is the right solution for that corridor. So definitely put that in if that's one of the priorities that you'd like to see resources coming toward. So that we can actually implement that, so that we can look at those cracked sidewalks, so that we can look at intersection reconfigurations to calm traffic, so that we can do some of those things that are not quite quick build, but are a little bit more. Definitely put that in and voice your support 100% with David, that this is a great opportunity for the public to really say what they value and what they want. And to speak in the affirmative. So definitely avail yourself of that opportunity. I also was remiss in that I didn't realize that Assistant Director Kim Lucas is actually with us also on this panel. And so Kim Lucas is the director or the lead of our policy planning and permitting Bureau, and she actually oversees a lot of that, what we call Move Forward PGH, which is the quick build bicycle program. So thanks, Kim, for being here too. Sorry I missed you earlier.
Yeah, thank you much. We also got an interesting question from Al K. Al would really like to see more money allocated to basic infrastructure. Is the policy department looking at ideas like congestion pricing? Self-fund more projects.
Oh, I like you so much.
We used to have Arlie.
Right, so Arlie is automated red light enforcement, which we actually are looking at. It is not, that is a statewide program that Philadelphia utilizes. Pittsburgh is looking at it at certain locations where they have the crash characteristics where automated red light might actually make. We're not implementing it as a money-making endeavor. We're implementing it, if we do implement it, as a safety measure, but it does generate resources that become redistributed by the state for grant resources. In any event, congestion pricing is a concept where, in order to, you basically, it's a user fee. So when you drive in a low occupancy vehicle, you experience congestion, but you also are congestion, and impose greater external costs to the larger city to manage that through traffic signals, greater wear and tear on the road, need for widening interchanges and widening other facilities. So as a user fee, congestion pricing is a concept that some larger US cities and many global cities use to actually charge an appropriate fee for the external societal cost that incurs. They use then those resources to make investments to make those alternate modes of travel more possible and more attractive for people to use. So as a region, through SPC, it has been floated out there because of the bridges and tunnels that we have. We actually would be a really great candidate for congestion pricing in this region. For obvious reasons, there is a lot of great consternation associated with congestion pricing as well. So there's a lot of study and a lot of analysis that needs to go on before that would become a reality. Here, it has been talked about. It has not advanced beyond that conceptual level at this point.
Is demand, this is in our budget, this is parking authority, but is demand pricing for parking considered congestion pricing?
Sort of, but not, that would work effectively if all parking were public parking. As you all know, this is more than you asked for, but maybe what you need to know is that we do have a parking tax, and we have a substantial parking tax here in the city of Pittsburgh. That parking tax only comes into effect for the daily parkers. So if you have a leased parking spot, or if your employer provides you parking, you don't pay that parking tax. You don't experience that parking sort of impact fee. So the vast majority of the parking in the city is actually exempt from that parking tax and exempt from the performance parking rates that the Pittsburgh Parking Authority does. So, yes, performance parking is a form of congestion pricing, but it's sort of, a drop in an ocean as far as, how it's doing in affecting behavior overall on a large scale.
That makes sense. Sounds like a lot of private pricing. A good question, though. Any other questions? You can either raise your hand or just type it into the Q&A if you'd like. It's a tough draw. It's one of our first good summer nights, I understand. People are ready to get outside. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody that attended. If you have any questions or additional comments, you can email our staff specifically at CIP, as in, Capital Improvement Program, CIP@pittsburghpa.gov. And again, I encourage you to go to Engage PGH, fill out the survey, and let us know what your priorities are. Feel free to share it on social media, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. We'd love to see a ton of input. Last year, we actually had some great input. That's one of the blessings of moving to all digital. So we saw a huge increase in the number of survey responses. So we're hoping for even more growth this year. We can have an even more inclusive budget for 2022. With that, I'm again going to thank our IMP team. Thank you, City Channel. Thank you to Jim and Heather for interpreting. Thank you to OCA for promoting the meeting and putting this together. Thanks for Council Budget Office. Thanks, Domi, for attending. And if you're interested in recreation projects, we'll be back this time tomorrow. And then next Tuesday, we'll be here for kind of the more URA community development projects. Thanks again, and have a good night.